Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. West Africa has found itself on the front line of Europe's drug war. The region's role in the transatlantic cocaine trade goes back nearly 20 years, when Colombia's cartels, having almost saturated demand in the US, sought new markets in Europe. Consumption of the drug is at an all-time high, according to the EU's European Drug Report for this year, and so is trafficking. For more on this, joining me on Skype in Lisbon, Portugal, is Alexandra Bish, an analyst at the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime. Alex, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. This may seem quite naive, but when we think of the global drugs trade, you don't typically think of West Africa. And I don't know if this has got anything to do with Netflix or any of the other streaming services, but would you agree with that? West Africa, for most people, isn't associated with the drugs trade.
Yes, I think that is true indeed. And actually, if you look at the official estimates of the global drug trade for cocaine trafficking, at least, and methodologies differ, but the UN estimates that only 5% of the cocaine trade goes through West Africa. So perhaps that perception is actually correct.
The perception is correct, although I must say just recently there have been a series of articles that I've been reading, one of them actually called Cape Verde, which is a tiny island off of West Africa, the World Trade Center for cocaine. Is this an exaggeration, or is there something quite sinister and serious behind that? Especially because 600,000 British tourists travel there every year.
Yes, I mean, I can't talk extensively about the Cape Verde case. However, what we have seen in the past few months is an increase in drug busts across West Africa. So in Guinea-Bissau, in Cape Verde, in Dakar. And so this highlights the fact that this route is indeed still in use. Now, as part of the global trade of cocaine, it might not be huge, but it is still consequent, as you've highlighted, yes.
You know, we talk a lot, especially on this show, about, you know, the governments and, you know, sometimes they're being endemic in corruption. You know, we don't want to cast too much of a bad spell on Africa, but that's the case. Do you think that what's happening with a lot of these cartels is that they're seeing that, you know, maybe authorities are easier to be infiltrated? Does that have anything to do with where trafficking routes are navigated?
Yes, perhaps it is clearly the case for Guinea-Bissau, for instance. You know, in the mid-2000s, we saw an increasing number of drug busts, and there are numerous cases of that have been highlighted in both the academic literature, but also in the media of state involvement in the business. Now, in other West African states, you see that too. Niger is a case that has been highlighted. And actually, when you look at the routes that have been used in this trade, for instance, the Sahel route, which is now not as used as it used to be, you can see that most of the states there can be considered fragile or have characteristics of weak governance and poverty, such as Mali, Niger, and Libya. And we know that in northern Mali and northern Libya, but also at times southern Libya, these have been conflict zones.
I know that you've done some work in Nigeria. Nigeria, you know, the government don't like to admit it sometimes, but it does have quite a serious issue with drug use. Are the government, or even society in certain places in Africa able to deal with this, considering they feel like it's a taboo and do like, you know, drug problems to be swept under the carpet?
I don't think that the cocaine trade has certainly impacted local populations, but not as strongly as other drugs. You know, what has been termed sometimes as a opioid crisis, right? So synthetic drugs such as tramadol and codeine that are consumed indeed in Nigeria. I think it has been highlighted especially in northern Nigeria. So there is definitely a problem there. Now, to really identify the extent of that problem, you need drug surveys and you need rigorous methodologies, of course, to assess it.
There is, Alex, an exponential growth. That's what they're calling it, aren't they? An exponential growth in drugs use. And this isn't just in African countries. This is in North America. This is in Europe. Why?
Well, I think, first of all, it depends on the drug. So if we look at cocaine, the production of the coca plantations in Colombia has increased, according to some estimates, but has increased. For instance, UNODC estimated that in 2016, around 2,000 tons of coca were produced. That was a 25% increase compared to the previous year. So, of course, you've got more cocaine on the market, and as a consequence, you've got more cocaine consumed in populations. Now, we've also noticed that statistics in the UK, for instance, have shown that there's been an increase in cocaine production over the past 10 years amongst youth, so the demand is there too. If we look at other drugs, such as tramadol in West Africa, well, tramadol, it has been considered to be the drug of the working poor. And I remember you mentioned Nigeria earlier on. I had a taxi driver when I lived in Abuja, for instance, who would take tramadol because he had back pain.
Wow.
And he'd drive with the tramadol in his system. But why did he have back pain? Because he was working for 15, 16 hours a day, sometimes sleeping in his car, working 7 days a week. So it has really been considered the drug of the working poor. It's more expensive to get morphine. It's difficult to get morphine. So I think that tramadol, for instance, it has started to treat these small illnesses and pains, and then the abuses have come later on, and we've got more consumption.
Of course, absolutely. And when you were talking about, the drug of the working class, you could also put cannabis in that category, couldn't you? Which is very widely used now. You go down the road in any major city and you're likely to smell it. We're running out of time. I want to ask you, though, Alexandra, about where, the cartels are still being controlled. Is, the 300 billion pound a year industry, you'll know if that figure is accurate or not. Is it still being controlled by Latin America?
Okay, yes, it is. However, a number of organized crime groups are cooperating with the Latin American cartels. So we've seen it in Guinea-Bissau. There are some in Mali, and a lot of the Malian cartels are actually operating in Guinea-Bissau, but also we've seen it in Niger. So there is a cooperation that takes place. It's very difficult. There is, of course, a vertically structured organization in Latin America, but the organized crime groups that participate in this trade in West Africa are more horizontally structured. So it's more like small groups that will work with each other, and sometimes this has a real effect on sustaining conflict. For instance, in northern Mali, where you've got the signatories of the 2015 peace agreement that have fought over control of cocaine routes. Right.
Lastly, Alex, when authorities aren't tackling the situation, who does come in? Who's looking out for, the citizens in Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde and Mali and Niger, when authorities, just can't crack down on this bad behaviour?
Well, nobody, of course. I mean, it's the role of the state to take care of its citizens. There's donors will try to support these agencies, but there is not enough funds, and so the capacity of these agencies is too low.
Oh gosh, Alexandra Bish, thank you so much for joining us on Channel's Business Global. I know you're a very busy man, travelling all over the world. Sadly, that's all we have time for today, but do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channel's Business Global. Goodbye.